The day they handed my life's work to a man who thought a TED Talk counted as experience, they unknowingly signed the death certificate for their own company. By the end of that week, investors were running for the exits, government inspectors were storming the building, million-dollar contracts were disappearing by the hour, and the owner who had spent 15 years taking credit for my work was begging me not to walk away. The best part? I never sabotaged a single thing. I simply stepped aside and allowed their own arrogance to do the rest. My name is Rebecca Turner. I was 45 years old when everything happened. For 15 years, I kept one of the most important data facilities in Texas alive. Officially, I was the operations manager. Unofficially, I was the person everyone called when something caught fire, broke down, crashed, leaked, overheated, or threatened to destroy millions of dollars in infrastructure. Most people never saw the work. They only noticed when systems failed. The reason nobody noticed me was because I never allowed anything to fail. The facility wasn't glamorous. It was a giant concrete building packed with servers, cooling systems, backup generators, and enough networking equipment to make an ordinary person's eyes glaze over. Hospitals relied on us. Emergency services relied on us. Industrial facilities relied on us. If our systems went dark, other people's worlds could collapse. I knew every inch of that building. I knew which cooling unit made a strange noise every Tuesday morning. I knew which generator needed extra attention during summer storms. I knew every maintenance schedule, every emergency procedure, every hidden weakness buried inside 15 years of upgrades and repairs. I had practically built the operation with my own hands. Then came the meeting. The morning started like any other. A thunderstorm was rolling across Texas, dark clouds gathering over the horizon while I completed routine checks. Everything was running smoothly. That should have been my first warning. Nothing stays smooth before a disaster. One of my senior technicians, a guy named Ethan, found me near the server floor. "The boss is here," he said. I frowned. That alone was unusual. The owner, Richard Collins, rarely showed up unless he wanted attention. Then Ethan added something that made my stomach sink. "And he brought his son." I closed my eyes. "Please tell me he's not wearing one of those executive vests." Ethan grimaced. "Worse, designer vest, loafers, no socks." That was enough information. The son, Dylan Collins, had spent 6 years at college collecting expensive degrees and even more expensive opinions. The last time I'd seen him, he'd nearly crashed a critical system because he thought cryptocurrency mining was a brilliant side project. Apparently 6 years hadn't improved him. The conference room filled quickly. Managers took seats around the table, while Richard stood at the front wearing the smile of a man who thought he was about to change the world. Beside him sat Dylan. His posture screamed confidence. The problem was that confidence and competence are not the same thing. Richard cleared his throat. "Big news today." Nobody smiled. Employees learn very quickly that executives only call meetings for 2 reasons: to take something away, or to demand more work. Richard placed a hand on Dylan's shoulder. "My son is ready to help lead this company into the future." There it was, the future. Corporate language for the people who built this place are about to get pushed aside. Dylan stood and launched into a speech filled with buzzwords: optimization, innovation, disruption, transformation. Every sentence sounded like it had been copied from a business school presentation. Not once did he mention reliability. Not once did he mention safety. Not once did he mention the hospital systems depending on our infrastructure. Because people like Dylan never think about consequences. They only think about presentations. Finally, Richard reached the real announcement. Effective immediately, Dylan will become Director of Operations. The room went silent. My position, my department, my responsibility. 15 years of work handed to a kid who couldn't explain the difference between preventive maintenance and emergency repair. Richard quickly raised his hands. "Now, Rebecca, we're not getting rid of you." Of course not. That would have required honesty. We're creating a new position. I already knew I was going to hate whatever came next. Senior Compliance Archivist. I stared at him. He smiled proudly, as if he'd just offered me a promotion. A compliance archivist. After 15 years of running the operation, they wanted me organizing documents, managing files, handling paperwork, basically becoming a secretary for the man who had just taken my job. Dylan leaned forward. It's actually a critical role. We need your institutional knowledge documented properly. Institutional knowledge. Corporate language for teach us everything you know so we can replace you completely. I looked around the room. Nobody could meet my eyes. They all knew exactly what was happening. Richard wasn't rewarding loyalty. He was removing it. The worst part wasn't losing the title. It was watching 15 years of sacrifice dismissed like it meant nothing. I missed holidays, birthdays, family events, storms, vacations, relationships. Every time the facility needed someone, I showed up. Every single time. Now I was being sent to a storage closet so the owner's son could play executive. For a moment, anger threatened to explode. Then something unexpected happened. The anger cooled. It hardened. Became something much more dangerous. Because anger makes mistakes. Patience wins wars. I smiled. The reaction shocked them. Richard visibly relaxed. You're okay with this? Of course, I said. Dylan smiled. Richard smiled. They thought they had won. What they didn't realize was that I had just stopped protecting them. And that was far more dangerous than fighting them. The new office was exactly as insulting as you'd imagine. A converted storage room near the loading dock. No windows, old furniture, broken filing cabinets, a folding table pretending to be a desk. I sat down and looked around. Then I started reading. If they wanted me handling paperwork, I would handle paperwork. Every contract, every certification, every permit, every compliance filing, every insurance document, everything. Within 2 hours, I discovered something fascinating. My name appeared everywhere. Federal certifications, state licenses, insurance agreements, critical infrastructure filings, disaster recovery documentation, hospital contracts, emergency response agreements. Again and again, the same requirement appeared. Qualified operator, responsible supervisor, certified infrastructure specialist, Rebecca Turner, me, not Richard, not Dylan, me. The company wasn't built around the building. It was built around my credentials, and those credentials weren't transferable. Suddenly, the entire situation looked very different. They hadn't simply demoted me. They had accidentally removed the foundation holding up their entire business, and they had absolutely no idea. I leaned back in my chair. For the first time all day, I smiled. If they wanted paperwork, I was about to become the greatest compliance archivist in Texas. The next morning, I walked into my tiny office with a coffee in one hand and a notebook in the other. For the first time in years, I wasn't responsible for keeping the facility alive. According to Richard and Dylan, I was just the paperwork lady now. Fine. If paperwork was my job, I was going to become the most thorough paperwork specialist they had ever seen. I started digging through contracts, certifications, insurance policies, government filings, grant agreements, maintenance records, and compliance reports. By lunchtime, a pattern had emerged that made my pulse quicken. Everything depended on me. Not emotionally, not operationally, legally. My name wasn't just attached to the company. It was woven into the company's entire structure. Federal grants required a certified infrastructure supervisor. Hospital contracts required a qualified reliability specialist with specific credentials. Insurance carriers demanded oversight from an approved operator. Several government filings listed me by name as the responsible professional overseeing critical systems. Nobody had noticed because nobody besides me had ever bothered reading the fine print. For 15 years, Richard signed documents without understanding them. Now those documents were about to become very important. Meanwhile, Dylan was settling into his new role and immediately proving why he should never have been given it. His first major decision happened 3 days after taking control. I walked into the operations floor and noticed technicians staring nervously at the environmental monitoring screens. Temperature settings had changed. I felt my stomach tighten. For over a decade, we maintained server temperatures at 68 degrees. It wasn't random, it wasn't tradition. It was based on equipment specifications, environmental testing, and years of operational experience. Dylan had raised the target temperature by 10 degrees. I found him standing near the break room drinking espresso from a machine he'd purchased instead of replacement cooling parts. "Why did you change the temperature settings?" I asked. He smiled like a professor explaining something obvious to a student. "Efficiency." That word again. "I read a case study," he continued. "Major tech companies run warmer facilities. Cooling costs are one of our biggest expenses." I stared at him. "You read a case study." He nodded proudly. I looked at the monitoring screens. "Dylan, those companies design custom hardware specifically for those environments. Half our equipment is older infrastructure. It wasn't built for that." He waved dismissively. "You're thinking too small." I pulled out my notebook. "Just documenting the decision." His smile widened. "Perfect. Make sure you note the projected savings." "Oh, I will." I wrote down everything. Date, time, reason, his exact explanation, his direct authorization. Then I returned to my office. That afternoon, another incident occurred. A technician named Ethan burst through my door looking panicked. "You need to see this." Technically, I didn't. Technically, I wasn't operations anymore. But curiosity got the better of me. I followed him outside toward the generator yard. The massive backup generators were running through their weekly test cycle, something we'd done consistently for years. Except one of them wasn't running anymore. It had been manually shut down. By Dylan. I couldn't believe it. "Why?" I asked. Ethan looked exhausted. He said the noise was distracting investors during a video call. My blood turned cold. Backup generators aren't lawnmowers. You don't casually stop them mid-cycle. The test procedures existed for a reason. Improper shutdowns could damage critical components and create reliability problems later. Exactly the kind of reliability problems that only appeared when you desperately needed backup power. I closed my eyes for a moment. Then I opened my notebook. "Document everything." Ethan blinked. "What?" "Everything. Time, date, witnesses, exact instructions." "Rebecca, this is dangerous." "I know." "Shouldn't we stop him?" I looked toward the facility. For 15 years, stopping disasters had been my job. Not anymore. "Document everything," I repeated. Over the next week, Dylan continued his transformation of the company. Preventive maintenance was delayed. Vendor contracts were canceled. Equipment inspections were reduced. Safety reviews were postponed. Every decision came with a business school explanation. Every explanation ignored reality, and every single one went into my notebook. Then something happened that changed everything. Richard walked into my office carrying a stack of forms. His smile immediately made me suspicious. "We need your signature." Of course they did. I took the papers. Fire system certifications, safety attestations, regulatory compliance documents, all requiring verification from a qualified operator. Me, not Dylan, me. "You want me to certify these?" "Just routine paperwork." I looked closer. Several statements confirmed maintenance and inspections that I knew hadn't happened. One vendor had already been fired. Another contract had been cancelled. The paperwork was false. Not accidentally false, legally false. If I signed those documents, I would become personally liable. Richard didn't understand that, or maybe he didn't care. Either possibility was dangerous. I set the pen down. "I'll review them." His smile vanished slightly. "Review? That's generally how signatures work." His jaw tightened. Don't make this difficult. There it was, the real Richard. Not the friendly boss. The man who believed loyalty meant obedience. The man who expected me to absorb risk so he wouldn't have to. I smiled. I'll let you know. After he left, I opened my laptop and started checking records. What I found shocked even me. The fire system maintenance contract had been terminated. Dylan had replaced a specialized fire protection company with a general maintenance contractor because it was cheaper. I laughed, not because it was funny, because it was insane. A multi-million-dollar suppression system maintained by people who normally cut grass and trim hedges. At that moment, I made a decision. I wasn't signing anything. Instead, I sent a formal notification to the appropriate regulatory agencies informing them that I no longer held operational authority at the facility. Nothing dishonest, nothing misleading, just facts, accurate, documented, verifiable facts. Then I waited. 3 days later, my phone rang. It was Greg, facilities director for the regional hospital network. We'd worked together for years. "Rebecca," he said carefully, "tell me something." "Sure." "Are you really out of operations?" I looked out my office window. Actually, it wasn't a window. It was a painted cinder block wall. "Yes." Silence. Then another question. "Who's supervising critical systems now?" "Dylan Collins." Longer silence. This one lasted several seconds. Finally, he sighed. "Oh no." That response told me everything. The hospital understood exactly what was happening. The clients understood. The insurers would understand. The regulators would understand. The only people who didn't understand were Richard and Dylan. And they were the ones driving the company. That weekend, I received a breakfast invitation from Greg. When I arrived, he wasn't alone. Sitting beside him was a woman named Victoria Monroe. She represented an investment group building a brand new data facility outside the city. Within 20 minutes, I realized this wasn't breakfast. It was recruitment. They wanted me to run the new operation, complete authority, better salary, better benefits, modern infrastructure, no entitled executives, no family politics, no Dylan. When Victoria slid the compensation package across the table, I nearly laughed. The number was life-changing. For the first time in years, I could breathe. I accepted, but I requested one condition. "I want to bring my people." Victoria smiled. "Done." I left that breakfast feeling lighter than I had in years. For the first time since losing my position, I wasn't worried. I wasn't trapped anymore. Richard thought I needed him. In reality, he needed me, and he was about to learn exactly how much. Monday morning arrived, Investor Day, the day Dylan planned to unveil his vision for the future. The conference room was packed. Investors, executives, consultants, lawyers, everyone important was there. Dylan stood proudly beside a presentation titled Transforming Legacy Infrastructure. I sat quietly in the back, waiting. Then the doors opened. A government inspector entered. Behind him came legal representatives. Behind them came Greg. The room immediately went silent. The inspector looked directly at Richard. "Are you the owner?" Richard nodded nervously. "Good." The inspector opened a folder. Then everything began to collapse, and for the first time in 15 years, I wasn't the person trying to stop it.